Sorry about that, everyone. Um, right. So I said that we've heard a lot about the issues facing the Caribbean with respect to urban sustainability, but I want to focus on the challenge of financing urban development and addressing the challenge, what approach we can take. All right. So over the last 10 years or so, we've found that there has been changes to the development financing landscape. Countries in the Caribbean have found it very difficult in terms of mobilizing resources in order to fulfill the various development agendas that they have. And this is as a result of them graduating to middle income status. For example, Barbados. So you find that there is a decline of the more traditional forms of financing, such as the development loans. There's also another challenge that Caribbean countries face, and that is where countries are impacted by natural disasters and financial crises, which they don't have control over. You know that the Caribbean is susceptible to a lot of the geopolitical risk, a lot of the environmental and natural disasters affecting the world. Added to that, there's a challenge where Caribbean countries don't have the financial wherewithal in order to address the challenges on their own, right? What we've found is that a lot of Caribbean small island developing states are heavily indebted. So in some countries, you find that there is a debt to GDP ratio of about 60%, and some of them can go as high as 183%, which, for example, was this case up until 2018, right? So based on what UNDP has said, there has been, for example, public debt to individuals and to institutions ranging from about 54 to 73%. And that is within countries like the Bahamas, Jamaica, St. Kitts, right? There are also high levels of, or rather I should say that these high levels of government debt have then intensified the challenge of financing long-term development, right? And mainly it is, they're encumbered by the high interest payments as well. So you have a situation where you are, your fiscal, there's very little fiscal flexibility for Caribbean states, right? At the local level. And then also you're challenged where there is, by natural disasters, which then affect your fiscal, balances. You're also challenged by the fact, as I said before, that there are limited development financing options. But what we've also found is that with respect to the Caribbean, there has been little or rather limited integration of economic and urban development strategies and land policy. I think Renelle has shown earlier that there was a challenge where very few countries had, I think it was a national urban plan, right? And this then allows political directorate to make unfettered decisions, right? You also see that where there's limited integration of urban and economic development strategies, or even land policy, that capital and economic objectives override all of the other all of the other considerations with respect to the physical environment, the social implications, the issues like gentrification and so on. You see it a lot in the Caribbean as a result of the fact that there are tourism dependent, right? So you seek to attract foreign investors at all costs with very little regulation, right? So with respect to what the Caribbean can focus on, what is within our control, I don't want to give the impression that the Caribbean has not been seeking out finances, that the Caribbean hasn't been able to do anything, because Caribbean countries have had to find ways at any means in order to finance development. Whether funding comes through grants, whether funding comes from the Caribbean Development Bank, but there is a need at the local level to develop financial systems where urbanization can be integrated into the combination of grants and so forth. Recently, I spoke about the role of, at the Caribbean Urban Forum, I spoke about the role of community development financial institutions, right? That is an idea that the Caribbean can focus on, rather utilize in order to see or actualize the strategies for urban development. At present, you find that community development financial institutions are informal in the Caribbean. You also find that there are, where in the formal financial market, we find that there are development, at a local level has been facilitated by institutions like the credit unions. There's also been the venture capital market, although it is small, there is scope for it. For example, in the British Virgin Islands, there is a trust fund set up in order to finance projects related to climate change. There's also need to establish a criteria of partnerships and support systems, right? And this is in order for us to coordinate and to align the different public and private investments that we would want to utilize in order to finance our urban development. I know that the Caribbean Development Bank 2016 or 17 was developing a regional urban strategy. So far, I haven't been able to have a look at it. I'm not sure of the status of it, but I don't think it has been released as yet, right? But that is of interest. Also, there should be the joint definition of a feasibility criteria for sustainable development initiatives. We know that each country is facing different challenges at the same time and within different scales at different proportions. But there's need for a criteria on how we would determine the feasibility for sustainable development initiatives. And in particular, how we interact with or partner with the development banks, the public actors, other stakeholders, and bringing private capital into the scope of financing the development. And lastly, there's a need for us to really to deal with what is within our control. And we can look to local fiscal systems, but in order to harness the sub-regional biodiversity, which would then prompt the innovation the economic growth that we are seeking to engender and explore the potential for alternative financing mechanisms, right? I can speak about the debt for climate 19 outreach to the international market in order to facilitate a debt for nature swap, right? As I said earlier, there's a venture capital funding that is available to the Caribbean as well, right? So I don't want to keep you any longer, but I will just end by saying that despite the challenge that we face, there is scope for us to do what is within our remit. There's also the opportunity to reform governance and administrative systems, especially where there is limited or no capacity at the local level for decision making, as well as for the generation of financing of finances, right? So here ends my presentation. Thank you very much.